too. That's the aim of this. It's why Landcare approached me at the end of last year to do this. So before we begin, I'd just like to say that I'm sitting here in Kangaroo Valley, or Kangaroon in the Dharawal language. This is Dharawal lands I'm sitting on. So I'll begin today by acknowledging the Dharawal speaking peoples, because they are the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm sitting today. And in the spirit of reconciliation, I acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia, so wherever you may be today. And I give my respect to all the elders past, present, and those that are emerging, and extend respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that might be joining us or watching this, because I believe this will be on YouTube. That's me. Not holding a reptile though, holding a platypus. So I'm Jack and I'll be presenting today. And I was asked to prepare this talk by the local Landcare, so I focused my attention on the reptiles, the Illawarra, Shoalhaven and Southern Highlands, because that's the area that I live in and have the most connections to. And I spend most of my time outdoors there. So I'm going to indoctrinate you all into the church of the reptile. And by the end of this, we can all agree that these animals are a vital part of the Australian landscape and they should be given the respect they deserve. Not really a very respected group of animals, unfortunately. And I'm going to be presenting on 3 distinct sections, depending on how much waffle I do in between and go off on tangents. So I'll try and keep it to 3 areas. First of all, I'll introduce what reptiles are and look at a few different types. And then I'll zoom in and have a close look at just a couple of key species, which are local to here, and they tell a story for all reptiles in Australia, really, with different conservation ideas. And then I'll end up the presentation with a third and final part, which is, to my thinking, the most important bit. It's what we can all do to protect these valuable members of our ecosystems, with a focus particularly for landholders. So anyone with a bit of land, what you can do to help the reptiles in your local area. So Australia, it's a hotspot for reptiles. If you were a reptile enthusiast, there's really no better country to be in. We've got about 860 species at the moment, and that number's always going up, of course. They keep finding more. So 860 species, and that's more than any other country on the planet. If we say compared Australia to all of North America, they've only got 280 species. So quite a few more. New species are being described about an average of 15 a year over the last decade. That's mainly due to the use of genetic technology these days. We can distinguish species a lot more easily. And so we've got about 10% of the world's reptiles. So we really are a biodiversity hotspot. That gives us a great responsibility to look after what we've got, and we've got 10% of the world's reptiles. Unfortunately, reptiles are going downhill. Just like every other wild animal, there's little wild left. Us humans have been in and poked around and changed everything. So study after study worldwide shows reptile populations are in decline. Now, there are a few exceptions. We've got some invasive reptile species that are spreading into new areas, possibly replacing endemic reptiles. So the Asian house gecko is an example of this on the east coast of Australia. And we've also got other reptiles becoming locally abundant thanks to habitat modification by humans. So there are some winners. There are some reptiles that are winning because of human modification of the landscape. The garden skinks that you probably see running around your lawn are a classic example of this, but probably brown snakes as well, a less liked species. So reptiles in Australia really struggle to attract the public and political attention. There's a lot of attention on threatened species, endangered animals, but typically they're the more charismatic ones, the mammals, the koalas, the birds, even the frogs to some respect. Reptiles miss out on the attention when we're all focused on other environmental issues and other species. That's why it's my job to change that. Well, there's not a lot of effort being put in to conserve reptiles. They are being protected, but often as a byproduct of protecting other species. Specific reptile-specific conservation efforts are few and far between, unfortunately. And of course, there's not enough biologists studying the reptiles. There's not enough eyes out there looking at everything. I teach quite a few students in my role as an environmental education teacher. And it seems like every second biology student wants to be a marine biologist. Everyone wants to get up to the reef while it's still there. There's a lot of people interested in birds too, I've noticed. So lots of twitchers out there. I'm not quite sure what the name for someone spotting reptiles is. Maybe some comments and can be put in there with suggestions. So with inadequate surveillance of the reptiles, we really don't know which ones are in trouble, where they're disappearing from, whether some are actually surviving just fine. So we need more people out there looking. So I'd recommend, if everyone's not already involved in iNaturalist, get the iNaturalist app and start recording, because it will generate a data bank for us to look back on. So we've only got one Australian reptile species that has been declared extinct. That's the one on your screen now. It's probable that more vanished before they could be studied or identified. We probably lost some before they were even recognised. So this is Gump, and Gump was the last of her kind. In 1979, the most common reptile on Christmas Island was Gump and her kin here, our ancestors. 2003, they noticed they were going downhill from a study done in 1998 to 2003. They were left in one little isolated spot by 2008. And by the time the paperwork had done and they decided to go in there and rescue them, in 2009, they found 3 females. And they took them into captivity. And there was one more wild one seen in 2010, but that was it for the Christmas Island skink. Last of a kind in 2014. Let's hope we don't lose any more. So why are the reptiles and the amphibians declining? It's the same list you see with pretty much everything else that's declining. Habitat loss is the big one. And with that, we get food source loss. We've got invasive species coming in, whether they be the ones that came here accidentally or the sheep in the background there that we put here. Diseases are running rife. Foreign diseases get in. Pollution, the illegal wildlife trade. There's a demand for Australian wildlife overseas. We have very restrictive export practices, and if you restrict the export legally, there is a demand. So people go and catch them and sell them. Road mortality is terrible for reptiles. A road's a nice warm place on a sunny morning. Altered fire regimes, the big one. I'd actually link that into habitat loss. The forest we see now isn't the way it was previously. Human persecution. Still plenty of people out there whacking snakes, even blue tongues. And of course, climate change. It's going to be a bit of an unknown what it's going to do with the reptiles. So lately, we've been bombarded with calamities and disasters on our media, and we cop it on the traditional media, and if you're doom scrolling on social media. So here's something else to worry about. We're losing all the reptiles, the very twigs on the end of the tree of life. And they've been on this planet a lot longer than we have, and they're the end points of ancient lineages. They're being pruned right now. It's a bit depressing, really. So let's start with some basic. What's a reptile? Well, we're going to have to start at the beginning for this. And apologies if I get a bit long-winded here, because reptiles are really my secondary interest. Paleontology is where it's at. So the reptiles first appeared on Earth about 310 million years ago during the Carboniferous period. It was a swampy time when most of the world's swamps, which became our coal today, got laid down. Not so much the Australian coal, it's mainly Permian. So we've got these ancient origins. So about 300 million years ago, the world was a boggy place. Life was coming out. We got our first onto land. We got our first forests, but life was still linked to water. There was a whole lot of landscape out there not being used. So the reptiles, when they evolved, solved this. They had a watertight egg. They evolved from ancient amphibians and quickly diversified. And then they actually made it through the Permian Triassic mass extinction, thankfully, when most of the world's species disappeared. And of course, after that mass extinction, we enter the age of reptiles. So from about 250 million years ago to 65 million years ago, We've got dinosaurs and a whole host of related reptiles. And I actually blame these things for my years of chasing reptiles. They were the gateway animal. And I wonder what children did before we knew about dinosaurs or we had trains, because most kids seem to be obsessed by one or both of those things. Anyway, another mass extinction. So most of the reptiles, including the dinosaurs, got wiped out in that 65, 66 million years ago event. But some survived, such as the crocodilians here, waving goodbye to the sauropods. And after that mass extinction, it was a reset time, and we basically had the evolution of all our modern reptiles. So we've got a very rich diversity today. It's about 9,000 species alive. They range from quite small little chameleons that happily sit in the end of your thumbnail, right up to the massive saltwater crocodiles. So what makes a reptile a reptile? Let's go through some features. First of all, they mostly are egg-laying, although Australia, being it is full of weird and wonderful things, has a whole host of non-egg-laying species. So tiger snakes, red-bellied black snakes, blue tongues, lots of really commonly known animals don't lay eggs. They buck the trend. It seems to be a cold climate thing in Australia. So here in Southeast Australia, we have reptiles that are live bearing. It seems to be linked to the temperature, the ambient temperatures. One interesting is you might have this animal if you're a wild place with plenty of dead timber lying about. They spend most of them hidden in timber or under timber on the ground. So this three-toed skink lays eggs here in New South Wales. But if you go and have a look at the populations in Tasmania, they don't lay eggs. We're seeing a transition there as they're actually evolving the ability to keep the eggs inside. The hypothesis is that keeping the young inside the mother allows her to bask and develop the eggs rather than just ditching the eggs out there in the wilderness somewhere and leaving them to do their thing, which is what most reptiles do if they lay eggs. Other than the crocodiles, no reptiles I'm aware of actually care for their eggs. Really, a python will coil around them and keep them warm until they start hatching. But that's really about it. So the idea is that cold temperature is forcing evolution of the live bearing. It's a bit puzzling though, because lots of South American tropical species are also becoming live bearers. So not so sure about that hypothesis. Righto. We've seen what makes a reptile. Let's look at the reptiles we have. The extant ones, the ones that aren't extinct yet. These are the reptile orders. So if you think about your hierarchy of life, we've got our classification system with the domain, the kingdom, the phylum. Then it comes the order for the reptile orders. And then, of course, family, genus, and species. So we've got the testudines, they're the turtles and tortoises. They've got the protective shell. And the biggest group of all, largest order, is the squamates with the snakes and lizards. And we've got the crocodilia, ancient animals, archosaurs. These are your alligators, your crocodiles, caimans, gharials. And then by themselves is the tuatara in New Zealand. It's the last little tip of an ancient group, which are just holding out. That's the orders. Let's go to the next level of classification. We'll start looking at the scaly Australian families. We're starting with the best ones here. Hope no one just got triggered. What a glorious animal that is. So we'll start with my favourites, and they're probably the most maligned species of animal on the continent. It's either them or spiders, I'm not quite sure. We should do a poll in the comments. Humans do seem to be programmed to be scared of snakes. I guess we evolved with some dangerous ones. So yeah, this is the eastern brown snake. Glorious animal. I'm not so sure about the name. Such a typical Aussie low-key name. It's a brown snake. So all these elapid families, they're venomous. They've got fangs in the front of their mouth. They use that venom to catch their prey and occasionally defend themselves. So about a third of all the elapids are Australians. We've got the lion's share of these dangerous venomous snakes and the not so dangerous venomous snakes as well. They all evolved from an aquatic ancestor, and they sort of split into two groups. There's the ones that became the sea snakes and the ones that became the land, the lapids. Might come back to them a little bit. Okay, from the sublime to the ridiculous. You might have come across these digging in your veggie patch or moving landscaping material around your yard or picking up firewood perhaps. So these are tiny little burrowing snakes, the blind snakes. Shiny scales that move from the ground. The eyes are reduced to nothing. They don't bite, but they do stink. If you pick one up, they'll defend themselves with scent. They've got lots of species. If you're someone keen on discovering new species, I say chase these guys. We keep finding new ones. And because they're so rarely seen cryptic, if you dig one up, there's a chance you might find something new. Although telling them apart's a bit difficult because they pretty much all look the same. You have to get good counting scales and looking at shapes of scales. These guys are wonderful. These are file snakes. There are 3 species in the world. We've got 2 of them up north, not around, unfortunately. They're pretty useless on land. They can't crawl about. They're totally aquatic. And a baggy skin with a texture like a file, which helps grip fish because that's what they eat. That's Nessie. I used to have one in a tank, but they get about 6 foot. So you need a big tank. So Nessie moved on. Might be in Featherdale now. It's a keeper. I sold it to. The colubrids. Now, this is where Australia bucks the trend. Probably the most common group of snakes around the world are colubrids, and yet in Australia, we've got virtually none. There's very few species. Where I am, there's only 1 confirmed species. Maybe another one will be here soon. They are moving their way down the east coast, these brown tree snakes. So they're in Royal National Park now, occasionally crop up in Wollongong. There's one isolated recording in back of Nowra, so they're probably going to spread down. We'll see what happens with them. Most of them are non-venomous, but there's a few that will cause you a bit of trouble. One of these brown tree snakes, I'd say less than a bee sting, really. You have to be unlucky to get symptoms from them. They've got rear fangs, the ones that are venomous, so they're right in the back of the mouth. They've got to give you a good chew to get anything in. Oh, look at this glorious animal, diamond python. So plenty of pythons in Australia. Again, we've got the world's share, the world's the most species anyway. And diamond pythons are probably the most cold adapted of all our snakes. They're on the lower part of the east coast of New South Wales, and then they transition to the regular carpet python by the top of New South Wales. And in the western flowing areas, we've got another version, the Murray-Darling carpet python. They're all the same species, there's different paint jobs. So what shouldn't we have? Well, we shouldn't have any boas and we shouldn't have any vipers, at least not right now at this point in time. Although, as you can see from the police constable there are boa constrictors out there because that one got picked up in Sydney not so long ago. Down the bottom, little green viper. That's from South East Asia. That came in on a boat. So they do turn up. And, the top corner, that's just a pretty little viper I took a photo of in, where was that one? Oh, it was Crete, in the Mediterranean. So boas, I don't know, they're unlucky. They might have got here, but they got denied by the East Australian current. They did disperse accidentally on rafts of vegetation from South America, and they made it to some Pacific Islands. So there are Pacific Islands as close as the Solomon Islands to Australia. You find boas, but they've never made it to Australia. The currents just aren't favourable. Hit that East Australian current and end up somewhere cold and miserable. South of the country. And vipers, well, they never made it here either. Lots of other animals have made it across the so-called Wallace Line, across the Sunda Strait, but vipers didn't make it. So you find vipers as close as Bali, but none here yet. Lizards.
Before we move off snakes, we've got a question from Monique. She'd love to know
I can't see the comments, so I can't see.
That's all right, I can ask.
Yeah, cool. Yeah.
How do you tell the difference between a brown snake and a tiger snake?
Well, to a snaky person like me, I think even if I saw them in the dark, I'd tell the difference. So a brown snake is a lot more narrow. It's a lot longer for its width. so it's more noodle-like, I guess, whereas a tiger snake is a much more robust animal. They're a lot chunkier for their length. The brown snake has a more circular cross section, so it's more round. The ventral surface is flattened, but it's more round, like your finger, I guess, with a sort of flattened base. Whereas a tiger snake is more oval. It's a lot more flatter, squatter, wider. So very different build. Brown snakes have a narrow, pointy skull, very, very pointy nose, whereas the tiger snakes have a very broad head, really big, chunky, buffy head with a very sort of flattened face. So it's more of a square head than a long, narrow head. And then, of course, there's the color. Brown snakes are usually brown, and tiger snakes range from, well, tinges of greeny blue right through to black, but they've almost always got bars on them, hence the name tiger snake. And if you get bitten by one, you'll have very different symptoms too. Is that enough information on distinguishing the two?
That's great.
Righto. So lizards are snakes with legs. Actually, not all of them, not these ones. These are pygopods. They're legless lizards found just in Australia and New Guinea, these particular types. That's Burton's legless lizard there. It's a real winner because they eat small lizards. So we've made plenty of spots for small lizards in our gardens. So good to see there are some winners. The old Burton's legless lizard. Legless lizards are actually more closely related to geckos than the other lizards. Speaking of geckos, here's one of Australia's ones. Now, I did try and use all my own photographs for this slideshow, just for copyright. Unfortunately, that means you'll see lots of my fingers because I like to poke things or pick them up. So, Australian geckos are a bit odd. We've got different geckos to most of the rest of the world. So those diplodactylids, they're sort of us, and New Zealand have got those. We don't have any, don't have very many of the true geckos, the Geckonidae. Yeah, so that's geckos. Everyone likes geckos. I think it's the big eyes. Agamids, dragons. Again, we've got more than our fair share of these things, although they are found right across the world in hot places. We've got this one here. It's quite a highly derived specimen with those funky spines all over it from the central deserts. But there's plenty of dragons around. Probably the most common pet reptile on the planet is the central bearded dragon. Very common pets. Cropped my fingers out of this one, although you can still see my boot. My toes are in the shot. These are the varanids, the monolizards, the goannas. And again, Australia's got most of the monitors in the world. Got an abundance of these things. Got some nasty teeth, the old lace monitor. I wouldn't recommend picking them up. And they've got some nasty saliva as well. There's a possibility they're actually got some proteins in there that'll do you in. Might be venomous. So just have a look at that lace monitor. See, he's got stripy front legs. Let's bear that in mind for something I'll show you later. Marvelous animals, the goannas. And skinks. Everyone's familiar with skinks. There's gazillions of them. They're everywhere. They're common as muck, and there's all different species. This is one of my favourites, the little weasel skink. You find these usually in shady spots that don't bask much. Although I've also found them up trees inside bird's nest ferns, a long way from the ground. And interesting about skinks, I'm just looking at this one. It's just reminded me that a lot of skinks and also our elapids in Australia have banded lips. Don't know why they've got banded lips. If anyone's got any ideas, someone needs to work out why two distinct reptile groups have evolved the same face patterns. What we shouldn't have? Well, some quite famous lizards that we never got. We'll go clockwise. So those beautiful green and blue thing there is from Fiji. That's an iguana. So the iguanas are American, South American, up in North America. And just like those boas I mentioned before, they rafted across the Pacific. They made it to Fiji. They never got here. Currents again. We missed out on the iguanas. And then the next one there, that's an Asian house gecko. They don't belong here. They came with people, and they rocked up in Queensland only a couple of decades ago, and they have colonised wherever people are. So that one there in my hand is the first one I found here in Kangaroo Valley. I heard the distinctive sound and went poking around and found it. And another one since been found in the valley too. I don't think they can survive the winter here. So I don't think that one's. Well, I know that one didn't. But yeah, they're on their way. There's another similar one, the Pacific gecko, that's already making its headways in Sydney. And then below that, we've got that lovely little green thing. Once again, in my fingers, that's one of the true lizards. That's your European lizard, or the wall lizards, the lassetids. That one there's in Croatia, I think. And then chameleons, which of course Madagascar, but made their way to Africa, haven't made their way here. I'm sure there's examples of all those things that don't belong here in people's collections, because there is a worldwide trade of reptiles. Righto, turtles. That's a rescue one. It's a green turtle from Shoalhaven. 6 of the 7 turtle species in Australia's water. I guess it's good to be girt by sea if you like turtles. This one, freshwater turtles. This is the long-necked turtle, little baby one. They wander around on land as well. So I guess if they're wandering on land, they're a tortoise, not a turtle. Bit of an interesting thing there. Marvelous creatures, these ones. And here, of course, is our classic tortoise, which we don't have. If they ever do get here, they're going to love Australia. Most of the tortoises are arid adapted. They like hot, dry places, and they're vegetarians. They don't have to catch food. Whenever tortoises manage to raft to islands, they get big. So who knows? One day maybe they'll get here. We did, of course, have back in prehistoric times a different lineage of giant tortoises, but they've been extinct in Australian mainland for quite some time. Some did manage to raft across the Lord Howe Islands. There's fossils of them Lord Howe Island, and the last ones actually lived in Vanuatu until people got there. I think they must have been delicious because there's none left now. Crocodiles. Look at that lovely big mud gecko. It's up in Port Douglas, that one. So there's 2 left in Australia. Quite a few around the world, but we think of them as real survivors, but there's not many of their lineages left. There used to be all sorts of weird and wonderful crocodiles. There was tree climbing crocodiles and ones that walked around their back legs, dinosaur style. But at least there's some left. None around here where I am, although I tell students on school excursions that some of the Minamara River. It's always good for a laugh. And we shouldn't have this sort of crocodile, though. This is an alligator. Although that particular specimen is in a scout camp in Pambula. It probably got out of someone's backyard. Someone's pet got away. Interestingly, another one got found in the backyard in Dapto not that long ago in Wollongong. So there's definitely those out there in private collections. Not quite sure why you need a pet alligator in your yard, but could be fun. Now, they're not reptiles, but I'll just quickly mention the frogs because they're often linked together. In fact, a herpetologist, a person who studies reptiles, is also a person who studies amphibians. So just a quick run through our families. We've got the hylids, the tree frogs. We've got the southern frogs, the ranids. There's only one of those, I think. That's what most of the world has. Ranids are left top of the world, but we've only got one. Microhylids, they're like a miniature tree frog, often without the pads. And of course, the bufo. We don't really have those native, but there is one which is everywhere. If you go to Queensland, you'll know what I mean, the old cane toad. Right, now I'll just focus in on a few species. Are there any other questions? I can't see the comments, but if there are.
Yes, Jax, there is a question.
Great.
What would you recommend if someone found an Asian house gecko in their house?
Number one, make sure you know what it is. There are some key features. They have spines in the tail, but then again, so do some Australian species. They have quite distinctive toes, if you know what you're looking for. And they've very distinct pink coloured skin during the day. They sort of transition in colour a bit. If you are 100% confident, I'd euthanizing it. Not quite sure on the ethics and legalities of those. So bear in mind, this is going to YouTube. I'll just leave it at that. Certainly tell someone about it, put on iNaturalist. But the problem with people killing geckos, if they think they're Asian house geckos, is we might lose things that we are meant to have. I at least twice a year see pictures of smashed frogs because someone's found a cane toad and then shown on Facebook the ex-cane toad, and it's 99 times out of 100 just one of our local frogs, which looks a bit bumpy, like a pobblebonk or something. So if you do find an Asian house gecko, if you are confident you know what it is, yes, probably best to remove it. But then again, they're here now, and that's probably the way it is. Any other questions?
Yes. There's one from Linda about what's the difference between a crocodile and an alligator.
Oh, hi, Linda. Two separate ecological sort of lineages. The alligators are more cold climate. The crocodiles are more tropical, and they've ended up with different body shape and different abilities. The Chinese alligators, for instance, sort of actually nearly hibernate in riverbanks. They burrow. The easiest way is to look at the mouth. If you can see the teeth, if it's smiling at you, it's a crocodile. In Australia, you're only going to get crocodiles unless there's an escaped pet. The alligators usually have a broader snout. Yeah, you probably have to look at a couple of images of both, and you will pick up on the differences if you look at enough pictures. That's about the most helpful I can be. Sorry.
That's fine. Thanks, Jack.
No worries. Yeah, you're unlikely to see an alligator in Australia. It's very rare and exciting when they do crop up out of people's personal collections. Right, so now I'll get to part two. I'll introduce some local to me. I'm not quite sure everyone else is from, but they're local to me, some species, and they'll help us discuss some conservation ideas and some habits of reptiles that make them at risk, and some other interesting things, or things I find interesting. So this is a blue tongue. Obviously, when you look at the tongue, it's blue. And this is the biggest species of blue tongue. We've got quite a few species in Australia. And there's a couple overseas as well. They did make it across to New Guinea. This is the biggest one, the blotched blue tongue. So anyone from cold areas will recognise this one. They're found from Tasmania up through Victoria, the alpine regions, and then there's little isolated pockets in other places. And that blue tongue is a defence mechanism. It's a bit of a shock tactic. If you disturb a blue tongue, it'll open its mouth wide and puff its body out and make itself look as big as possible, because big means scary. And then it'll flash that tongue at you. And bright colours can be quite surprising. So when you see this big hissing, puffing, air-inflated reptile flashing a blue tongue, you hopefully get the idea to move away if you're a predator. Yeah, quite a good display they put on when they get going, the old blue tongues. So these guys are the cold climate version. They're very dark coloured. You can see it's almost black, not like the common blue tongue with its sort of grey and brown bands. And they do get up to 60 centimetres long. They're quite large. They're viviparous. They're egg laying. They don't lay eggs. Sorry, they're live bearing, and that's assumed to be the cold climate adaptation. And they're mainly herbivorous blue tongues. Once they get to about this size, they're pretty much just eating vegetation. Well, they do eat small animals and insects, and even bits of carrion lying about. They sort of shut down in winter. They don't go into true hibernation. They just chill out and brumate. They don't eat, and they rarely come out to sun themselves. But the reason I put this one up is because everyone's familiar with blue tongues. But they've got really interesting distribution patterns, particularly these blotched blue tongues. And it's one of the really important things to recognise with reptiles, particularly these large skinks, is that they've got very broken up distribution, and you get isolated populations kilometres, if not tens of kilometres from other populations. So these little islands is where we're going to get speciation. We're going to get all these genes that are found in that species only. And those genes will undergo genetic drift, if you're familiar with that concept. So slowly over time, that population will change with which genes are frequent in there. And there's going to be different climatic conditions. So the natural selection there will be different. So you end up with different species with those populations. Now, this blotched blue tongue, you find them in the Blue Mountains around Katoomba, and then they sort of just disappear. And if you drew a straight line from Katoomba down to where I'm in Kangaroo Valley, you wouldn't see any at all through the Southern Highlands until you get to Fitzroy Falls. And there's a little isolated population just living along one escarpment there, just near the falls themselves. So that's tens of kilometres from the nearest other ones. That population there has been isolated for thousands and thousands of years in isolation with its own genetic pool. A little bit further down the coast, you find them again by the time you get to Sassafras, which is west of Nowra. And again, that's an isolated population. You go west from there and you start losing these and start seeing shinglebacks of all things towards the Crookwell area. So these isolated populations need to be preserved because they've got unique genes to that population, and they might be the seed point in a few million years of a whole new species. So everything is evolving, everything's changing, and just like humans came from one little group of, well, of Africa and then spread around the world, we just don't know what little isolated populations will one day become. Even if they undergo a bottleneck and there's very few of them left, they can bounce back and become new species. Seems to be the theme in evolution. So it's up to us to preserve those unique little populations. I do feel concerned for the population of Fitzroy Falls. There's probably only hundreds of them left, if that. Water dragons. Again, speciation in process. So on your screen, you should be seeing two water dragons, and I've chosen the boys because the boys are the most colourful in breeding season. And hopefully you can straight away see, even to an untrained eye, that these two boys look a bit different. They've got different paint jobs. So on the left-hand side of your screen, you've got your classic eastern water dragon. These are the ones that you find from top of North Queensland all the way down to Sydney, and they come down to Wollongong and then inland in the Great Dividing Range as well. So they've got that black stripe behind the eye, and they get the lovely orange or red chest, and quite a large, robust animal. And then we get this transition. By the time you hit around Berry and Shoalhaven between Wollongong and Nowra, they change. And you get the Gippsland water dragon, which then progresses all the way down into Victoria. So the Gippsland one's got the green tinge to its skin, often a blue almost, and they've got yellow throats rather than the reddy orange throat, and they don't have that the black marking behind the eye. So they're classified as the same species, just two different subspecies, but this is speciation in process. These two populations of water dragons must have been somehow divided by something that happened, probably climatic. We had one group which evolved to be more cold tolerant, they're the Gippsland ones, and the other group became a more warm tolerant version, slightly different paint jobs, different looks, slightly different body morphology. The actual shape of the body is a little bit different. And now they're actually almost together again. And just like the blotched blue tongue, there's the weird distribution with the Gippsland, for instance. The Wollongong River has eastern water dragons, except the very top end where you get some Gippsland ones. And then you find little populations of Gippsland dragons in Abercrombie Caves, for instance, and at Wombeyan Caves too. So two populations will probably eventually become two species if we're around here to see it. Marvelous animals, water dragons. The generic name is Intelligamma. They're named for their intelligence. They're quite a clever animal, and don't think they're in very much threat. There seems to be an abundance of them. Long-necked turtles, another aquatic organism. These guys were winners. They were winners. We put in dams, we changed the way creeks flowed, we added farm dams, impoundments all over the place. That increased their habitat. They suddenly had all these extra places to live. But then we started driving motor cars, and they're not very good at crossing roads. And then somehow foxes, which had always been sort of present, foxes now are having a significant impact, and we're now losing most of the eggs of the long-necked tortoise to foxes. So the first groundbreaking research, this was back in 2001. It was Spencer and et al.'s little link I put down there on the corner if you want to look it up. And they were just looking around the Murray River near Albury, looking at turtle nesting sites, because they all come out of the water, and you might have 100 turtles nesting in one spot, one stretch of the river, because sand ends where they like to nest, lay their eggs. And they were finding in 2001 that was 90% of the eggs laid by the turtle were taken by foxes. Subsequent studies all around the state have found that often it's 100%. So whilst these seemingly are quite common, you see a lot of turtles, often unfortunately smashed on the road, the predation pressure is going to have serious implications. This is a very long-lived species, like 50 years plus. So we might be seeing all these adults. It seems like there's lots there, but there's no recruitment. There's no young ones coming into the system because of the fox predation. And the population might already be doomed. It might be a species that appears to be okay, and then suddenly just disappears. Without the data, we don't know. So, yes. Sorry about that sad story. If you love tortoises and turtles. Is there a question?
From Greg Jack. Do water dragons lay eggs or have live bearing?
Oh, great question. Yeah, no, water dragons lay eggs. All the agamids, all the dragon lizards lay eggs. Water dragons nest on sandy banks. Water dragons don't go up as high the bank as the turtles do. The turtles seem to be a bit cluier. I found turtles nesting hundreds and hundreds of meters from the nearest water in quite weird places up hills, whereas the water dragons will get lazy and go a few meters above the waterline and dig in a sandy bank. And if there happens to be a flood in that time, well, no eggs hatch that year. But yeah, they lay eggs, water dragons. And you'll see an abundance of little babies running around. Oh, usually around Christmas time, that summer holidays period, I see lots of babies in my yard. And they're a vital part of the food web because they get snapped up. They're not very clever when they're little. They have to get clever. But once they're adults, they're very smart lizards. Okay, some token cute frogs. That's a red-eyed tree frog in that image, again, sitting on my hand. They used to be called banana frogs because they're the frog that usually turns up in fruit from Queensland. And they don't really belong in Shoalhaven where I am. That one there was in 2011. I was quite excited to find that because it's what I thought was a fruit frog. But they're turning up a lot, and that little map down below shows Nowra and the places they've been spotted, where they've been recorded. That's in the records, and that's all recent spottings. So they've turned up, probably coming with fruit. Now they're spreading, and I recently saw a photo of one in Illawarra, which is not on that map, but it's getting closer to where I live, and they'll certainly be in the Highlands if they can handle the cold. So they're really cuter than a cane toad. So I guess that's a good news story. An Aussie native spreading around. It'll be helped by climate change. There's another example of a little green frog where I am, which was new to the area or newish. It's the little dwarf green tree frog. They're spreading, probably spreading with landscaping materials and plants. So nurseries bring in plants. They probably bring the little green frogs with them. So the little Litoria phalanx, the dwarf tree frog, I found one in Kangaroo Valley in 95, but I know another person, Gary Daly, found one in 94. And now they're probably one of the most common frog species in the valley. So there are things moving about. It might well have been the way it always happened. We're just unsure. Okay, let's get to the good ones. Red belly black snake. And I'll just preface this by saying I was younger and sillier when I took that photo, or had that photo taken. I've still got that red belly. It's sitting about a metre away from me right now, hiding under a rock though. It's not watching the show. Red bellies, they're glorious animals. They truly are, truly are. So there's two local stories with them, Darrell stories. Mundar's a story of how red bellies are friend. Leave it alone. And of course, it's a totem spirit here in Dharawal land because it built the Illawarra escarpment, one of their stories. So the Bidugang is one of the totems. So in the snaky world, it's usually referred to as a gentleman's snake. So a term I've heard a few times. Gives a headbutt before it bites. So you can pick up a red belly and it'll often give you a bit of a warning headbutt. Or if you walk a bit too close and tread in its tail, it might give you a headbutt. Or if you stupidly try and whack it with something, it might give you a headbutt before it sinks its fangs in. Really, the worst thing about picking them up is the musking. They have some anal glands and they spray a yellow stinky material, skunk style. So I usually try and pick them up in front of the cloaca, in front of the back end, not by the tail, but more of the mid-body. If I get old and decide I'm too old to keep snakes, I'll probably let go of my red bellies last of all because they really are such pleasant-natured animals. They are lovely. And they're very inquisitive snakes. They like to check things out. They nose around. I put interesting things in the cages with the ones I keep, and they like poking around and smelling them. Quite inquisitive. I've actually been sitting at a campground once with a mate, and we saw a red belly down the riverbank, and it was crawling along. We just watched it, and it crawled all the way up to us and came up and smelt my toes. And it was quite a struggle not to stand up and pick it up, but we just watched what it did. So they are quite inquisitive. And as I mentioned before, they're live bearing, probably a cold climate adaptation. Bit hard to lay eggs when you're a snake that loves waterways because, well, waterways are usually cool, wet places. Not the best place to leave eggs for a few months. So they keep the eggs inside. Fascinatingly, they're a bit like us, the red bellies. There's actually been studies that show there's a transfer of nutrients from mother to newborn inside. So not quite a placenta like a mammal has, but there is a transfer of nutrients. So they're not just an egg in a membranous egg sitting inside the belly. There's actually nutrients going in. Mum looks after them. The little babies come out. They're about the size of a pencil, not very big, quite cute. But of course, before we get babies, we need mummy and daddy snakes. So each year the males battle to stake out their territory, and the male red bellies battle for a territory, and all the girls that live in that territory. And once again, the gentleman snakes, they have a reptile-specific venom or reptile and frog-specific venom. So they could bite each other and do each other in, but they don't. They wrestle and wrestle. They don't ever bite each other. And the winner comes out on top and gets the girls. Of course, that wrestling is what you see usually in spring, end of winter and spring on social media. And it's quite impressive to watch. It goes on for quite some time if they're two similar sized large ones wrestling away. And every year I get on there social media, and so do all the other snaky people, and say, no, they're not mating, they're wrestling. And then all the people on social media tell us we're wrong. So that's one of those myths. If you do see on social media two snakes violently tumbling around each other, and they're black snakes, although other snakes do it as well, they're wrestling. It's two males. Mating snakes are quite boring. They just curl up next to each other and sit there for 6 hours, seemingly doing very little. Quite dull. In southern Australia, there's a belief that the presence of red-bellied black snakes or even the blue tongues will deter the venomous brown snakes. That's not true. It's probably based on observations that black snakes eat brown snakes, and black snakes do eat brown snakes. They eat lots of snakes and lots of lizards and mainly frogs. They sort of look for cold-blooded prey rather than warm-blooded prey, the black snake. But then again, there's plenty of brown snakes that eat black snakes. I've seen lots of photos of those too. So they both eat each other, even though the brown snakes are usually rodent eaters. So probably contributing to the myth is that black snakes and brown snakes have slightly different ecological requirements. The black snakes, because they love frogs, are found around waterways. So they're good, competent swimmers. They're live bearers. They can drop their young somewhere wet and boggy, not favourable to laying eggs. The brown snakes like drier places. Brown snakes, I'd call them almost fossorial, a fancy word for living underground. Brown snake spends most of its life in a crack in the ground or under a log or a burrow of a rodent. They don't spend much time out of ground at all, the brown snake. And they found in dry places. If you want to live in a burrow all year round, you don't be living in a wet one if you're a brown snake. So they found in dry places. So with the red bellies in wet places, brown snakes in dry places, it's probably just they're seen in different places rather than one keeping the other one away. Because scientifically, there is no evidence to support that either species impacts the presence of the other. Same with the blue tongues. The blue tongues are thought to eat brown snakes. Well, occasionally they do. A blue tongue will eat anything that goes in its mouth. If a baby brown snake comes past, it'll go in there. Makes a nice change from dandelions or other things they eat. But they don't keep them away. In fact, I've seen plenty of photos of brown snakes opportunistically taking on a blue tongue. Since we're talking myths, we probably should address a few more with the venomous snakes. Because there's bound to be lots of questions about different things with snakes. Love this photo. So, whenever you're talking snakes, there's always someone who tells you about the one time the king brown snake chased them on the farm and they couldn't get away on their motorbike, or variations on that theme. So I actually conjured up this image for you, although these gung-ho farmers going straight for the king brown. It's a sort of story here every year, and 9 times out of 10, it's from someone who lives in a place where there are no king browns. So that always develops into another argument. King browns are arid adapted snakes. You don't find them anywhere on the east coast of Australia. Simple as that. I've seen one on the road just west of the Warrumbungles, if you know that part of the world. So unless you're sort of Nyngan and higher and more north or west, you're not going to see one. Anyway, snakes aren't aggressive. They don't attack you. Full stop. If you're Americanized, period, yeah, snakes are not aggressive. So flood the comments right now with all your snake attack stories if you like. I'll address those later. But snakes aren't aggressive. They are defensive. So dogs are aggressive. Okay, so a dog's aggressive, a snake is defensive. Now, I've got a little video here. I hope you can get to work. This is actually the front of my house. And I was out there again this morning. It's still there. This is yesterday. The other video was the day before yesterday. So let's just walk along the path near my house. I'm not a photographer. I'm sorry. That's one of the local kids that's crossing the road. And what do you know? There's a little black snake, red belly. Oh, there's a tourist. Didn't even stop to see what I was filming. Just kept walking. And for the day before, got a bit close this time. Curious enough, that rock there on top, I only put that about 2 days before. I rebuilt that wall a bit. So you're walking past a black snake that close to the road, and it doesn't leap out and attack you. But I've walked past plenty of houses with dogs that are leaping out to attack you and trying to get you through a fence. So think about a dog when it sees something near them and races out to get them. And unfortunately, statistics show that a lot of people get done by dogs in Australia each year, particularly children. But snakes do not come out and get you.
So there's a question.
About 30 tourists walk past that. Oh, great.
Jack, have you heard that some snake handlers don't recommend or would elect not to have an anti-venom for a red belly black snake? Could you please elaborate why?
I can, and I'm probably one of those people. I have never had anti-venom. I have unfortunately been chewed on by a few snakes. Nothing too bad though. Anti-venom Australia is it's not a very clean product. I'm going to be talking about anti-venom on the slides coming up. So if I forget, just remind me about that, and so I'm going to talk about how the anti-venom works, and I'll come back to that if you don't mind.
All right. Yeah. And just what's the difference between black snakes and red bellies? Are they separate colour morphs or are they different species?
Oh, I say black snakes because they're black. I say red bellies, the same thing. So the black snake group is a group of snakes that are mainly brown, but they're just called the black snake group because the first one's found by Europeans who came here with the red belly black snake. Although the earliest recordings of its name is the crimson-sided snake. If you ever look up close to a red belly or a black snake, you'll see they don't actually have red bellies. The red is along the side. The belly's more of a pinky pale colour. The red's on the side, the bits you can see. So it looks like the whole belly's red, but unless you pick it up and look, you probably wouldn't notice, but no, it's not. So yeah, black snakes, red bellies, same thing. Also, New South Wales, you get the blue belly or the spotted black snake. It's a very similar creature. It just doesn't have that lovely crimson on the side, and often they're a washed out brown spotty colour. By the time you get up to Queensland, you get one where it's got more salmon colour all over its body, and it's the collet snake. And the king browns I mentioned earlier, they're actually a black snake. They're a black snake family. They're the biggest ones. So yeah, hopefully that addressed that one. I use the word black snake and red belly interchangeably. Oop. Poison versus venom. Yeah. So just to be pedantic and all, snakes aren't poisonous. You can, if someone asks me if a snake's poisonous, I'll usually say, no, you could eat it if you wanted to. So I just whipped up this little diagram for you. I like it. If it bites you and you die, it's venomous. And if you bite it and you die, it's poisonous. There's a bit of a difference. So venom is something that's introduced to your system by an animal or a plant in some cases. But if you deliberately ingest it yourself, it's poisonous. Just a little technical thing there. Oh, this little myth. Baby snakes are more dangerous. I don't know when this one started, but in the last decade or so, it's become something of common knowledge. So there's no truth to it, I'm afraid. There's a myth that young snakes can't control their venom dosage. There's no evidence on it. We do have evidence that shows the venom composition changes with age. So there's a 2017 study which showed that brown snakes' venom differed from adults to juveniles. And that's because the juveniles eat different things to the adults. Juvenile brown snakes eat lizards till they get big enough to eat mice. So their venom is more tailored to a reptile when they're little, and it's tailored to a mammal when they're bigger. It's called an ontogenic change. Venom toxicity also changes with location, not just by age. So brown snakes in Victoria have a different venom to brown snakes in northern Queensland, which is a little concerning if you think about the way that antivenom's created. What they do to create antivenom is they catch some snakes, or they have a bank of snakes in captivity, and they milk them. Some poor person has to pick the snake up and then encourage it to envenomate a jar, and they collect the venom, and then they inject that snake venom into horses, and the horses make the antibodies that we can then harvest. So if you're collecting snake venom from South Australian, say brown snakes, you're going to make an antivenom that might be not so effective against a snake from Queensland. So something does concern me a little bit. So let's talk about some antivenom facts and fictions. So the active ingredients in antivenom are antitoxin antibodies. Immune system, when you get exposed to something bad for you, will create antibodies, little Y-shaped proteins that are attached to something bad, a toxin, and neutralize it. To make antivenoms, we use horses because horses are big animals and you can get lots of blood out them without the horse keeling over. So you deliberately inject a horse with a small amount of snake venom you've collected, and it makes the horse a bit sick, but it makes antibodies to fight that venom. And then you inject the horse a bit more, and you just keep doing the process. And every time the horse gets a dose of venom, it makes more and more antibodies against the venom. And eventually get to a point where the horse can withstand venom hundreds of times greater than what it would be able to otherwise. So it becomes immune to the venom. And then you take the blood out of the horse, just take a couple of liters out of the horse, and you can process that horse blood and separate out the antibodies. So you end up with antibodies for snake venom, but they're horse antibodies, not human antibodies. So because the antivenom is made in horses, if you do get jabbed with some antivenom, or your pet dog gets jabbed, or your pet cat, or whatever else, your own immune system is going to recognize those foreign horse antibodies as something to attack. And so while the horse antibodies are circulating around, mopping up the snake venom to save you, your own immune system is mounting a massive defense against this unusual protein that's just been flooded into your system. And you'll end up with what's called serum sickness, which is a nice way of saying a horrible allergic reaction, basically, to a foreign protein in your body. Can make you quite ill. So the reason snake handlers don't like antivenom is often that once you've had a dose of antivenom, the next time you get it, you're probably going to have anaphylaxis, or at least a really bad, severe allergic reaction. If you are getting it for the fourth or fifth time, they're going to be treating you more for the anaphylactic reaction than they are for the snake bite. So that's why I personally chose not to use antivenom. And a few times I've had that experience. In regards to black snakes and that question before, black snake venom isn't going to kill you. So maybe there's an idea that you don't take the antivenom just to avoid that serum sickness. But I probably would have the tiger snake antivenom. In fact, I think that's the recommended antivenom for a red-bellied black snake. The black snake antivenom works really well in the non-black black snakes. So your king browns and the collet snake. The black snake antivenom will work great for those. But I'm pretty sure for a red-bellied tiger snake would work the best, just for the venom components. The problem with a red belly or a black snake bite is that it's got lots of things in there which will start dissolving you. So rather than just switching you off, the venom is actually digesting you. So you'll end up with some quite nasty problems. You can lose a finger if you get bitten by a finger by one. Myths. Oh, every year, for the last 5 or 6 years now, there's been a little Facebook thing about don't worry if you get bitten by a snake because there's this new super duper anti-venom that treats all snakes. Well, there's quite a number of errors in that particular post, and I've many a time corrected them all, but I've stopped now because some local person had a bit of a go at me over it, and I just couldn't be bothered anymore. There's been polyvalent antivenom for all our snakes since 1962. So there is a polyvalent antivenom that will treat all Australian snakes. If they don't know what's bitten you, we've had it since 1962. It's not some new whiz-bang thing. And to some extent, all of our snake antivenoms are polyvalent. There'll be a little bit of goodness in a brown snake antivenom for treating a tiger snake. And it's simply because they use the same horses to produce all these things. And when they spin it down, as they say, and try and get out the antivenom components they need, they get a bit of everything. Okay. So, of course, no one wants snakes in their backyard. Well, I do. Australians are quite proud to boast about how deadly our serpents are. And we take pride in how dangerous our snakes could be. But it doesn't lend itself to letting them exist in our backyards. We're proud of our snakes, but we don't want them nearby. So if you don't want to accept them, what steps can you take? Well, all our snakes like to be low to the ground, except for the pythons. But the ones people worry about are the ones low to the ground. So they don't like being exposed. You've just got to remove the cover. So keep ground cover out of your yard. Don't have piles of all that lovely precious junk, sheets of tin, all the rest of it, timber. Keep your lawn short. Snakes don't like crossing short lawns. They don't like being exposed. Things that eat snakes come from above usually. So keep your lawn short, and if they don't feel comfortable, they won't cross your property. So yeah, make sure you keep your lawn short, neat and tidy, clutter-free yard. If you're out and about, be snake aware. Wear protective footwear, such as good boots. And wear gloves if you're gardening. Now, there are no snake-proof fences. There's no snake-proofing fencing you can do. There's no plants that you can plant to keep snakes away. There's no products you can spray. There's no snake repellents that actually work. And don't waste your money on the electronic snake repellers. They do nothing. They They get sold, but they do nothing. And you can see that, look, that's a nice picture there of a tiger snake, courtesy of 7 News, curl up around one. If you do see snakes in the yard, it's probably habituated. And if you get up close to it, it doesn't go away. It's definitely habituated. So it's seen you a lot. It's not scared of people. Snakes usually are scared of people. If they see you, they'll get out of the way. But if they're habituated, like that little black snake at the front of my place from the video, they won't worry about people. Let us watch them go past. So if you do have a habituated one, it's seen you plenty. It's been living there all along. You just haven't seen him. If you've got to get rid of it, you've got to train it that people aren't friendly. So hit it with a garden hose. You don't have to get close, put yourself in danger if it gets agitated. And snakes are exothermic. They don't like being cold. They've got to rely on the sun and the environment to keep them warm. Cold means danger to a snake. So you spray it with cold water out of a hose and it'll move on. And they learn pretty quick. If you are going to hit with a hose and it's the middle of summer, please run the hose a bit first, because water out of a hose in a hot summer's day is usually hot. So run it for a bit and then spray the snake. If you must get a snake catcher out to catch it, if you want to waste your money or spend your money on that, do so. But there are snake catchers and there are snake catchers. A lot of cowboys out there, and national parks seem to hand out the license to catch snakes without a test of knowledge or ability, unfortunately. Just be aware that all the studies on relocating vertebrates are quite conclusive. A relocated vertebrate, whether it's a possum or a large lappet snake, it dies usually. So it's a slow death too. You move an animal out of its home territory because they're territorial, they know the place, put it into someone else's territory. That means it's going to compete with the animals already in that territory. That means it doesn't know where it's going for water or food or somewhere to hide. It gets incredibly stressed. Snakes are very prone to stress and quite stressed easily animals. It becomes a mercy of predators. So it's usually a slow death. There's only been a couple of studies done with relocated snakes in Australia, but there's plenty from overseas. The ones in Australia showed, I think it was 100% mortality in brown snakes moved, and similar sort of horrifying statistic for tiger snakes. So snake catchers, the well-meaning Aussie hero who comes out and collects the snake, from an animal ethics point of view, maybe it's less ethical than this to someone who whacks it with a shovel. So yes, quite sad. All the good snake catchers these days, the ones I associate with, they move a snake quite close. Often they'll be just dropped off 50 meters away, but the owner who paid them doesn't know. I myself have moved a few snakes in my time, and since becoming, well, for the last 15 years or so, since thinking about this data and being aware of this data, I don't move snakes very far. People don't call me back to get the snake again. Snakes learn. They don't like the experience being hit by a hose, and they don't like the experience being picked up, and they stay away from people after that. I think really what we need to do is accept that we live in a country blessed with a multitude of reptiles. And if you do see one, admire it. Don't freak out. Educate your children. Stay away from them. And if you can, educate your pets. You can train a dog to be wary of snakes. There are courses that do that. Okay, I just saved one local species to last. So it's probably the most curious snake. This is the broad-headed snake, and it's Australia's only endangered snake species. It's a venomous snake, but it's not too bad as far as venom goes. Although there's no anti-venom for it. They've got to use tiger snake anti-venom if you do get bitten by one. I don't recommend the experience. It's a painful bite, unlike a brown snake bite, which is not painful. It does muck you up a bit. So these guys are fascinating creatures. They're very highly derived, or if you're into evolutionary stuff, the very end of the evolutionary line for lappet snakes. By highly derived, I mean they've got the most new features from basal species. These guys have got keeled belly scales. There's three close related snakes with the broadhead snakes. They've all got broad heads. They're all broadhead snake family. this is the one around here. They've all got the keel belly scales, which allows them to climb. So the Stevens banded snake will get up right up the top of gum trees. The pale-headed snake lives more inland areas. You find that all the way up inside river red gums. And of course, this broadhead snake loves cliff lines. It's a climbing elapid. There's not many climbing elapids in the world. Certainly not many in Australia. So it spends its life sitting under a rock in winter. It sunbakes indirectly. It has to sit under a very thin rock in the sun. And once upon a time, it would have been found in all the ridgelines around the Sydney area because it just lives on that Sydney sandstone. But those ridgelines are now covered in houses. And the ridgelines that aren't covered in houses are covered in trees because we've changed the fire regime. So all the areas shaded out, and it's stuck now on northwest facing cliff tops where it isn't shaded by trees, and it gets that afternoon sun and there's rocks for it to sit under. That's how it survives winter, under a rock. In summer, it moves into the trees, uses its climbing skills, gets up inside trees, into hollows, and that's where it spends summer before moving back again. It eats pretty much one type of gecko. It's a bit like the pandas are limited by their fondness for bamboo. Well, the broadhead snake's limited by their fondness for the little Leisure's velvet gecko. It does take other vertebrate prey as well, though. All my pet ones have been trained to eat rodents. So if you think about its life history, you can see why this particular snake is endangered. It's got a narrow food preference, very unique needs for basking because it's nocturnal. It needs to indirectly bask. So if you remove the rocks from its habitat, it's gone. So bush rocking, number one threat. People take bush rocks to their gardens. They pick up the nice easy rocks, which are sitting on other rocks where this thing lives. That's all gone. And of course, it lives where about a fifth of Australians live, in the Sydney Basin. So lots of bush rocks gone. We don't allow fire like there used to be fire. So all the ridges which it could live on have been shaded out. There was actually a little experiment done a few years ago in the Royal National Park where they went into a national park with chainsaws, chainsawed one bit of ridge. And what do you know? Once the rocks weren't shaded, the broadhead snakes had more habitat. Not that I can see teams of people out with chainsaws in the national parks being smiled upon. And of course, moving to the trees in summer is problematic because now we have massive conflagrations, those great big summer canopy fires. Thanks to our changed fire regimes, they get cooked in the trees. Once upon a time, the Dharawal people in this area would have used more cultural burning practices and not had those giant summer canopy fires, or very rarely anyway. So, yes, the fires have doomed these guys in summer. Yeah, I've got one here, actually. I was playing one with one earlier. I might just... Oh, actually, I'll keep it to the end. At the end, I'll pull one out and wave it around rather than
So, Jack,
stop the slideshow.
I've
Yeah.
got a question. Are snakes and
Great.
goannas affected by the ingestion of rats and mice who have taken poison baits?
Yes, they are, unfortunately. Yep. So reptiles need a much higher dose than mammals. So the dose required to kill a rat is not going to kill a goanna, but it is a cumulative poison for the most part. So repeated doses will certainly not help them. And yes, those toxins used in rodenticides do kill reptiles. With the big mouse plague we had not that long ago, when we had the whole series of calamities hitting the country, floods, fires, and then pandemics, we did get the mouse plague, and they used extensive amounts of poison that would have wiped out lots of our reptiles and unfortunately a lot of our birds, which also eat rodents. So yeah, depressing, but that's the way it is. Not a big fan of poisons myself. So let's talk about the value of reptiles, because they are valuable both economically and, well, for biodiversity point. Reptiles are the ecosystem health indicators, and so are frogs for that matter. In fact, frogs probably a little bit more so. they're good bioindicators, reptiles. Lots of reptiles and lots of different types of reptiles in the area indicate that an ecosystem is healthy. And apologies for the terrible cliche there with the canary and that image I've whipped up. Healthy populations of reptiles are functioning ecosystems. And this is where we need data. We need more people out there recording what they see and what reptiles are there, because they're going to help us monitor which ecosystems are working. And when I say ecosystems, excuse me, I also mean the farm ecosystem, because where we've got agriculture, that's an ecosystem now. There are things moving around, interacting with each other, just like a wild, unhuman modified ecosystem. So even in agricultural lands, reptiles are indicators showing how healthy a system is. Now, probably from an economic point of view, the best thing about reptiles is they're great pest control. Most of them are fairly high up the food chain, you could say, fairly far along it. They eat lots of things which we don't want on our farms. Snakes and lizards feed on pests that damage crops, and they control rodents in particular and other small animals, but they also provide food sources themselves for other animals which help us. A lot of our birds of prey, for instance, will eat snakes as well as eating things we don't want on farms. I'm not sure if that snake was doing its job there, because I saw plenty of rodents in that field. So I've just pulled up this is quite a new article to try and convince people with science. It was only published at the end of last year. It caused a bit of a stir in the snaky world. Rick Shine is the lead author, and he is the godfather of Australian snake scientists. Since the 1970s, he's been studying snakes, mainly Australia's large venomous snakes. That's what he's really been into, and he is certainly one of the world experts on these animals. So his article here tried to quantify the economic value of large venomous snakes, in particular brown snakes, to Australian farms. So in Southern Australia, brown snakes are very widespread. You get other large venomous snakes in the areas they live in, but tiger snakes, copperheads, death adders, they're mainly found in specific habitats, usually the riparian zones and swamps, or the sandy heath country for the death adders. You certainly don't find death adders anywhere there's been cows. Cows plus death adders equal extinct death adders. So these are the areas where farmers usually tolerate the black snakes. They think they keep the brown snakes away. As already mentioned, that's a bit of a fallacy. So the brown snakes in South Australia, they're large venomous snakes, and they can cause a fatal bite if they chew on a person or a pet dog. But the bites really are infrequent, and there's very few fatalities each year in Australia. We've got a fantastic medical system. These snakes are very shy. They retreat from people. You've got to be really unlucky to get bitten by a brown snake unless you are interfering with the brown snake. So if you wear the right clothing and do the first aid if an accident does happen and have access to medical care, you probably will be all right. Domestic animals do get bitten frequently. Horses will see a snake and poke with their nose because their eyesight's not that good and they haven't learned yet. And dogs and cats attack snakes. That's why dogs get bitten. It's not the dog in the yard just meets a snake and the snake decides to bite it. Snakes are defensive animals. So if your pet dog gets bitten by a snake, it's because your dog attacked the snake and the snake defended itself. Anyway, brown snakes in this study tend to avoid human contact. And they found this in the study because they looked at all the data for radio tracking stuff, and they found population densities of brown snakes, very, very high population densities in areas where people were, and yet people rarely saw them. So for every brown snake you see, there's probably 20 or 30 you don't see. The radio tracking studies show that they live most of their time on the ground. A brown snake will travel between places, occasionally get a bit of sun. They spend most of their life underground. It's even where they do most of their feeding. That's where the rodents they eat are. So they also spend their cooler months inactive underground too. So they're only out and about for a limited part of the year. So one study referenced on brown snakes for radio tracking shows that 93% of the time a brown snake is underground. It's not really in contact with people. Very secretive animals. So This paper did a rough calculation. They looked at brown snakes in captivity. They looked at radio track snakes. They put all the data together. They worked out how many rodents a brown snake each year. Then they worked out how much food those rodents would eat if the brown snakes weren't eating them. And then they went further and thought, well, if those rodents were there and weren't getting eaten, how many offspring would they have and all the rest of it? Mathematics of this kind is, of course, very broad. There's a whole lot of assumptions being made, but they valued them over $500 million a year just to Southern Australia's agricultural areas. So looking at $500 million saved from brown snakes alone. So they've got a substantial economic advantage. And perhaps we shouldn't go out of our way to whack a brown snake when we see them, because they are there, even when we don't see them, helping us out by getting rid of rodents. Insectivorous lizards, well, they're in everyone's backyards and they're wonderful as well. The little geckos and skinks are small, but they're important. They're a valuable role as pest controllers. Anything that'll fit in its mouth, and often things that won't fit in its mouth, they tear to pieces, they will get. So each one of these lizards is eating dozens and dozens of little creepy crawlies every day. Think the value of that is for market garden areas or just in your own backyard veggie patch. And then think of the value in balancing the ecosystem. They're eating the little things that are often preying on our plants. And of course, the lizards themselves are food for other bigger things, snakes, birds, mammals. So they're a vital part of the ecosystem, both helping us with keeping insect numbers down and contributing significantly to food for other things that we might like to see in our gardens. Seed dispersal, not such a big thing with Australian animals, but is important in our rainforest areas. So our large skinks in particular will eat fruit and distribute seed. Unfortunately, they do distribute the seed of pest plants and weeds. There's a bit of a problem with asparagus weed on the east coast, and blue tongues do eat the little red berries and spread asparagus weed. But they also, all these large skinks spread rainforest fruits and then, of course, deposit the seed with a bit of fertilizer. I'm a big fan of rainforests. Rainforests used to cover this continent until the fireweeds took over. Fireweeds, of course, being the main part eucalypts. And rainforest doesn't burn well. So I'd encourage the reptiles to be spreading rainforest. Good soil is soil that's aerated. Healthy soil is aerated. And we've got whole hosts of burrowing reptiles in Australia. So for good soil, we need to encourage our burrowing reptiles. Now, even those little garden skinks dig holes and fossick around, but there's a whole suite of skinks, some of them losing their legs as they evolve towards an underground lifestyle. There's burrowing snakes. There's even specialised burrowing elapid front fang snakes like the beady. All these things are moving the soil around to aerate the soil. It improves the soil structure and the water infiltration. So good on the little diggers. They're what I call minor considerations. Sorry, those last ones. Oh, and of course, there's cultural and ecotourism value. There are lots of people that like to take photos of reptiles. I've had a few of them contact me if they're after a particular species, and I'll take them out to where they are, and they'll spend hours photographing the reptile. I'm not really into photographing reptiles myself, as you can tell from my terrible photos, because I'd rather look at other things and try and get the perfect shot. But yeah, they are valuable for ecotourism. And as we do have 10% or thereabouts of the world's reptiles, there might be tourists coming here to see them. So just a little reminder why the reptiles and amphibians declining. You know, we've got the habitat loss, food source loss, invasive species, diseases, pollution, wildlife trade, road mortality, altered fire regimes, human persecution, and climate change. So the question is, what can you do to help? Well, if you're doing something that addresses any of those, you are helping our reptiles. So we'll just go through a few things that you, the landholder, can do. And remember, snakes are our friends. Just take a pause for a drink. If there's any other questions, maybe fire them at me.
So, Jack, we're just going to do a time check.
Yep.
Because we're up to an hour and a half now.
I told you I'd waffle. Someone should have been pressing edit,
Oh,
like slow down,
look,
stop.
there's a lot of people still online, but yeah, I guess I'll just invite people if they need to leave. Of course, welcome to if you needed to, but also welcome to stay on. About
Yep.
how much longer do you have, and then we'll pass over to Jen.
How about I quickly bash through what I think is the most important part? I'll just go slide by slide, and I'll bite my tongue. So give me
No,
2 minutes.
I don't want to wrap you up at all. But I just want to obviously invite people. You know, they need to do what they need to do. But it's totally up to you and how you're feeling. But yeah.
Okay, I'll just go through it quickly, and then we'll let Jen. Sorry, I didn't realise the time. I don't have a timer on me. I like to go on. Okay, here's what you can do to save them. Number one, gather data, get an iNaturalist, take a photo, record the stuff that you see. Not just for reptiles, do it for everything. The more data, the more we can use that data. And knowledge is power for saving things. Habitat loss, no home, no reptiles. So stop destroying the habitat. It's as simple as that. If people are destroying the habitat, make a fuss. This is, of course, Wilton here with their, well, apparently they're threatening koalas up there, but they're threatening everything else too. So if we stop losing habitat, we will stop losing reptiles and amphibians. Invasive species. Cats and foxes are the number one problem. You've probably seen images like this before. That's just the contents of one cat that was shot out in Western New South Wales and all the reptiles they eat. There's been a few studies. So there's about 1.8 million Australian reptiles estimated to die per day from cats alone. 1.8 million little reptiles gone. But pet cats killing them too. The statistics on what pet cats kill, even though everyone says it's not their cat, well, no, they're killing a lot of reptiles. We're losing about 650 million reptiles per year just to cats. And then you factor in foxes and dogs as well. So if you've got a cat, keep it indoors. If it's outside, it's really a feral in peril, I think. If you are a landholder, let shooters on your land. Yeah, and even though I don't like poison, support baiting programs targeting foxes and cats. Or maybe get out there yourself, trap cats. No, maybe not the dogs, the foxes certainly. Diseases, we've lost lots of frogs. There was an imported disease came in, the chytrid fungal disease. It got into our frogs. It's an African disease, and we're wiping out dozens of frogs. This will happen with reptiles because people illegally import reptiles from other places, and they'll have things that get our reptiles. For instance, the snake mite is not Australian, but I've already seen wild snakes in Wollongong with snake mites on them. So snake mites have escaped collections and got out into the wild, and they will transmit more disease. Road mortality. Estimates vary greatly, but we lose millions upon millions of reptiles each year on our roads. Simplest solution is to slow everyone down. We don't need to be going so quick on the roads. There are more expensive solutions, of course, by modifying the road infrastructure itself. But we just got to remember, as it says there on the slide, the animal didn't cross the road crossed the animal's home. No more whacking snakes, please. We don't need to kill snakes. The majority of hospitalizations for snake bite are people trying to kill the snake or trap the snake. It's as simple as that. It's there's been a few papers done on it with statistics, but both of them say over 80% of snake bite hospitalizations are through people choosing to interact with a snake. So if you choose to walk away from a snake on your property, you will not get bitten. Add habitat. You can actually add habitat to your landscape to increase reptiles. So this here is a picture from Kangaroo Valley. There's a project going on here where we're adding bush rock to ridgelines for that endangered species, the broadhead snake I spoke of before. There's similar things happening with earless dragons and all sorts of things. So we can modify the habitat to make it more reptile friendly. We can slow the flow of water in our watercourses for our riparian species. Messy farms are wildlife friendly farms. It's as simple as that. So can we please stop doing pile burns? There's this Australian farming obsession with piling up all the timber and burning it. And whilst I do love a bonfire, there's probably a better thing we can do with the timber rather than putting it in the atmosphere. We can put that carbon somewhere else and allow it to be a home. Put it in watercourses maybe, slow the flow of water. We also need the right fires. So we need to change the way we use fire in this country. We need to change the fire intensity. We need less intense fires. We need to increase the fire frequency. We need more fires, and we need to have small patch burn fires to get that mosaic of fires. I could waffle on for hours about this, but I'll quickly proceed to questions. There you go. Race through that.
Okay, I think we're ready.
Yep, that's looking good. Thank you.
Looking good. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Jen Byrne. I'm from the Biodiversity Conservation Trust. The New South Wales Biodiversity Conservation Trust and Landcare are working to raise awareness and support to private land conservation efforts across the state. And so I'm here on behalf of the Biodiversity Conservation Trust just to give a little bit of an update on some of our programs in the South East. So firstly, just a quick thank you to Alex and also to Linda at South East Landcare for organising this wonderful event. I've certainly learnt a lot about reptiles this afternoon. And so thanks for the invitation to come along. And also to Jack, thank you for that presentation. That was really cool. I spent the weekend on the Kangaroo River, and some of the things that I noticed were long-necked turtles, the goanna water dragons, and now I don't know if it was Gippsland or Eastern water dragon, but also some red-bellied black snakes. And so I was certainly paying attention to the reptiles, and now I know a lot more about them. So thank you. I just want to take up a couple of minutes of your time just to quickly talk about the Biodiversity Conservation Trust and what we do. Some opportunities to become involved in our programs if you own a piece of land or if you have future plans to own some land. And also just to promote some of our resources and programs, education resources that we have available to support me. I acknowledge the Darawal speaking, I'm on Darawal speaking country. So I'd like to thank traditional custodians for caring for this rich Illawarra landscape, its wind, its escarpment, its floodplain and sea. And I'd like to pay my respect with landholders to enhance and conserve biodiversity across New South Wales. So our core business is supporting landholders on private land to look after biodiversity. We do that across the whole of New South Wales. I represent a regional area which is the South East, which extends from Helensburgh in the northern Illawarra down to the Victorian border, and includes the snowy district, as well as up and around Yass and Burrawa and the Southern Highlands. So a beautiful part of the world. The Biodiversity Conservation Trust has a range of programs to suit different landholders to support them to protect and conserve biodiversity, depending on the location, property size, type, and eligibility for funding. So I'll just touch on a few of those programs that you may be interested in if you own land or interested in purchasing land or know people that have got land. Just a quick run through of our conservation management program. So there's a particular program where property owners can receive annual management payments in exchange for actively managing biodiversity on their land. So we at the Trust often have priority landscapes or priority pieces of the South East, for example, that we're interested in working with landholders to protect and conserve. And so at different times, we might offer programs that allow people to enter into a funded conservation agreement, which is a situation whereby a landholder can get annual payments to manage biodiversity on their land. We also have a program that relates to biodiversity offsets. So if people are interested in getting an annual management payment for their land, if they're interested in generating biodiversity credits and selling those credits, and there's a market for those biodiversity credits, then we also administer a biodiversity stewardship agreement program. And we provide support to people who have biodiversity stewardships agreements and provide them with ongoing support and site visits and the like. There's also different programs that we offer for people who are interested in voluntarily entering into programs and becoming eligible for grant funding. So we have a Conservation Partners program. That's one of those options is for if a landholder is interested in entering into an in perpetuity agreement to protect and conserve biodiversity on their land. So that's a permanent arrangement. It runs on title with the land. These agreements are for land that is kind of over 20 hectares in size and in a good ecological condition. And we can sign up agreements with landholders and provide them with ongoing landholder support and funding to encourage and assist them to manage biodiversity on their land in perpetuity. We also have programs available for smaller land holdings. So we have wildlife refuges. So that's where a landholder might have something around 10 hectares of moderate to good condition vegetation on their land, and they might want to enter into a program with us to get ongoing landholder support as well as grant funding. And generally speaking, one of the big benefits of the Biodiversity Conservation Trust is we've got an amazing network of experts who provide landholder support. We've got ecologists who can come out to your property and provide technical support, assistance, connect you with other people who are like-minded and managing land for biodiversity, invitations to events and workshops and newsletters and the like. So there's a link there on the presentations for our landholder support program. There's also resources if you don't own, if you're interested in learning more about how you can enhance and conserve biodiversity on your land. We have some free education and resources. One of the great offerings that we have at the Biodiversity Conservation Trust is an online conservation land management certificate or program. That's like the equivalent of a